Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor, and today I'm interviewing a very interesting personality. He has been at the top of India's bureaucracy, especially in the finance ministry during a lot of pivotal changes that happened in the ministry. And he's written a book about it, which is wonderful for us because it is a detailed examination of his time in the ministry. It's called We Also Make Policy, an insider's account of how the finance ministry functions. He is Mr. Subhash Chandra Garg. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you, Sharad. My pleasure.
So, sir, now the name you've named it We Also Make Policy, and that's very interesting because when people think about bureaucrats, they think that that's what they do, they make policy. But you say we also make policy. So why? Why have you chosen this name?
I think both the nuances are important. There is not that much clarity in my judgment that the civil servants have a massive policy role.
Right.
They usually considered as administrators, implementers of the legislation, programs, allocations and things like that. The policy role is not that much appreciated.
Right.
Whereas, as I said, there is big policy role which I wanted to bring up. The second one, which you just hinted, we also make policy. This is in a way inspired by the old Tata Steel ad,
Right.
where they used to advertise and said, we do a lot of things and we also make steel.
Ah, yes.
Right.
Right.
So I wanted to place that primacy of policy making role of the IAS in this context, and that is why I just picked up on that we also make steel.
Right.
And we also make policy. Policy is our primary thing.
Right.
By the way, I am writing a companion volume to this,
I see.
which I have tentatively titled as Steely Resolve.
I see.
That is an account of lots of things which happened during my entire service career.
Okay.
So this is focused on 2 years of
Right.
economic policy making, and that steely resolve focuses on the entire careers, right?
Right.
So steely resolves is steel,
I understand.
and also we also make policy. That is why this companion volumes
understand.
will go together.
Right. So now, for those who don't know, Sir was Economic Affairs Secretary from July 2017 to July 2019, and also in the midst of this, as it happens in the finance ministry, once you become the senior most official there, you also take on the role of finance secretary along with your other role. So he was finance secretary from March 2019 to July 2019, and as I said, he's actually seen a lot happening. And sir, interestingly, you would be one of the few bureaucrats who would have seen in just 2 years 3 finance ministers take
That's
on that
correct.
role.
In a way, that was coincidental because Arun Jaitley fell ill, the
Yes.
health was not great. So during his principal finance ministership between 2017 and 19, Piyush Goyal got the opportunity many times to act for him, including presenting that interim budget in
Yes.
2019. And when the elections took place in 2019 and Arun Jaitley expressed his unwillingness to take up this responsibility because of his health and all, and I got the opportunity to work with the third one.
Right.
So that happens. Sometimes the coincidence will make it happen.
Right, sir. So now from the book, it's clear that you actually had a very open and frank relationship with Mr. Arun Jaitley. But when it comes to the other two, I would like to ask you, and now this is a question that will come to you a lot. So I thought I'd get it out of the way beforehand before we get to the policy things that you talk about. Now, out of the other two, Piyush Goyal and Nirmala Sitharaman, who did you work with better? And also, who in your estimation worked better as a minister? Because you have shown that in the book you've talked about your less than cordial relationship with the current FM, but you've also made mention of several decisions by Mr. Piyush Goyal that might have not been best at that time for the economy. So,
See, policy making in finance ministry and Department of Economic Affairs happens to be the policy making
yes,
department of the government in a wider sense. The other departments are important, but they are focused on very specific roles, expenditure,
right,
revenue, disinvestment and things like that. But economic policy is in a wider sense allocated to the Department of Economic Affairs. And that is where you get to do a lot of work, whether it is capital markets, monetary policy, currency management, infrastructure, budget and so on. You name any major aspect, and you are also involved with others, for example telecom commission,
right,
disinvestment, some part of revenue as well, a lot of expenditure related because programs get in. So and in that process I must mention this, that if there is a very healthy relationship of discussion, debate, in that examination of what should we do, economic policy making is not a straightforward mathematical relationship.
right, of course.
You have various options. Somebody may prefer this because even behavioral, otherwise the mindset of people involved are also different. Somebody prefers a socialistic kind of thing, somebody may prefer a more private sector orientation, somebody government organizations, public sector, somebody may. So the point I am making is that there will always be different positions to discuss and debate.
Right.
And in that respect, all the three I worked with, I had many occasions where there was differences with all of them.
Right.
I have recounted even with Mr. Arun Jaitley, I had differences in the bank capitalization matter.
Yes.
Actually, he overruled me.
Yes.
I prefer to be overruled. I said because if it, but and likewise Piyush Goyal, the sovereign
Yes.
bond
Sovereign
issuance
bond issue.
matter or NRI deposits. These are two choices available. Somebody may prefer this for some reason, somebody may, right. And likewise Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman. So they were, they can be positional differences. I don't think there is a problem as long as there are differences.
Right.
The little bit of trouble starts when you start taking positions either attributing motives or unduly trying to overcome the other point of view.
Right.
So that is why, despite differences with Mr. Jaitley, there was not that a problem.
I
right.
see. Right.
And Piyush Goyal also in a way realized that on some issues where he wanted something to be done, but when we reached out to Prime Minister and Prime Minister did not favor, so he backed off.
Right, of course.
Right. But Mrs. Sitharaman, and this was a shorter period, perhaps maybe the understanding was not that, she might have come with certain mindset, some biases. That is why it led to little bit of, and I realized in the circumstances that this is better to move out rather than stay in and have a.
Right.
So I wouldn't say somebody is necessarily good or somebody is bad. I don't think we should judge people in that respect.
Right.
I would prefer to always discuss and debate a particular policy. That on that somebody's position, was it better in the public interest, in the national interest or not?
Right.
And I can't be judge in my own matter, so so I will leave it to somebody else or others to judge, but I must sort of place my viewpoint, and that is what I have tried to do in this.
Right. So now we can actually then come to some of the policy things that you talked about, which are several. You were there at a very instrumental time. So one was that the economic surveys under Mr. Arvind Subramanian, they came under quite a lot of internal controversy, right? They were discussed by the PMO, the cabinet secretary, and then you as well in the Department of Expenditure about what to include, what to not include. So my question is, what do you think that the economic survey should be? Should it be, as Arvind Subramanian wanted, a forward-looking document with kind of thematic points, or should it be what it was earlier, which is just a compilation of data over the last year, how the economy was, and that's it?
So let me answer a question in two parts. Number one, we must understand there is a formal process and role of the people involved in the economic survey.
Right.
Formally, the economic survey is prepared by and under the guidance of the chief economic advisor.
Yes.
And in our system of things, chief economic advisor, and he heads a division called economic division
Yes.
of the Department of Economic Affairs.
Mm-hmm.
So that is under the Department of Economic Affairs, and the formal process of approval is that the chief economic advisor prepares the survey. The Secretary Economic Affairs have a look at it.
Right.
And then finally it is approved formally by the finance minister.
Right.
So that is the formal process. So you have a role. PMO does not have a formal role
Right.
in the process of economic survey. But the other people involved, the chief economic advisor is also advisor in a way to the prime minister, to the government as such. So he would reflect the what the thinking is there.
Of course.
Secretary Economic Affairs would take care of that, and minister, of course, right? So that is the formal process. The convention had developed that let it be as far as possible, leave it to the judgment of the chief economic advisor, right? That is what it is. Now, when you are exercising your sort of authority or judgment as the independent producer of the chief economic survey,
Right.
then Arvind Subramanian decided that let me have a lot of policy related issues, related discussions,
Right.
and that is why he started bringing. Those were very rich in content, in terms of analysis and all. But at the same time, when you do that kind of analysis, an honest analysis of the economic processes or issues or themes, then there would be places where the government may not come out in very good light.
Right.
Right, and that is what had led to that kind of issue, that there was discomfort in the RBI about certain things which used to go in the economic survey.
Right.
There was also a discomfort in the PMO about those kind of things. They were more comfortable with the traditional economic survey. So that is how it was, and I had to resolve some of those issues which I have described in that chapter next, the economic surveys, because at one point in time we were literally told that don't bring out now. Right?
Yeah.
So, but your question about what is preferable,
Right.
that is where you are asking for my judgment.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So, in my judgment, I find that if you want to provide some thought leadership to the finance ministry, which it generally lacks, the thematic part of the survey, which Arvind Subramanian started, is to my mind a very, very welcome and a good addition. So I would prefer that to continue. This has been discontinued now.
Yes.
You're back to the old style economic survey. So in my personal judgment and professional judgment, I think that kind of analytical, we may think about to sort of dilute its political messaging from the economic survey which is presented in the parliament.
Right, of course.
It may come as not economic survey as it is, but an annual issues examination. Finance ministry had started another thing where an annual conference of economists was also sort of started. 1 or 2 years it took place as well. So it can come up as part of that backgrounder or a result of that conference, but that's a very valuable thing to know.
Right. And now, sir, when soon after you took over as Economic Affairs Secretary, the electoral bonds issue was making waves in the news and it was becoming quite controversial politically as well. Now, Mr. Arun Jaitley defended the idea, saying that it was better than what they had. He said that it had problems, and you've noted that in your book, that it had problems and it wasn't the most transparent, but it was better than what was there earlier. And you've agreed with this sentiment. But you also mentioned something interesting, which was that there was a certain urgency to bring about the electoral bonds to formalize the system. And so, what was this urgency at the time? And was it because the 2019 elections were coming soon?
See, I didn't see this in the sense anywhere related to 2019 election. Okay. So I had come in July 2017, and 2019 elections were two years away.
Right.
And no one mentioned it to me that it has anything to do with the 2019 election.
But there was an urgency.
But the urgency was, which I saw, was in a different context. The RBI Act had been amended in February. Right, by the Finance Act. All necessary changes in the income tax act, etc. had also taken place.
Right.
And I was here in July. About 5 months had already gone, and the scheme was not implemented. Right. So something which was considered as important and which also had become somewhat controversial was not getting finally done, finally implemented. So I saw the urgency from this point of view, that you have taken a decision, you have taken all necessary enabling amendments, etc. And this need to be concluded. And there, the people, as I entered in the Economic Affairs Department at that time, were in a way struggling. There were different opinions, etc. Right. And what I sensed was that the minister, the PMO, was not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
That this is not happening. Why is not happening? And I think that was the urgency, if you call it that way, that do it.
Get it done.
Yeah, get it done.
Right. And now, one of the most controversial parts of the electoral bonds issue was the anonymity that it provided donors. Now, this is a very different system, and it's more complex than, say, what is there in the US, where you have lobbying as a formal part of the system. Is that not something that was considered here, that you remove this anonymity, you make everybody come forward?
See, Sharad, anonymity was the basic structure of the electoral bonds.
Right.
If you remove this, then the electoral bonds collapse.
Right.
You had from many decades a system in the Companies Act where the companies could make donations to the electoral bond. That was a statutory arrangement for very formal, transparent, open contributions to be made for the electoral process, right? But that was not working.
Right.
Now, I mean that all of us policy makers or people involved as such need to sort of analyze and find out why was this not working and what was working.
Right.
What was working was a system of cash donation.
Yes.
A completely non-transparent system of cash donations. And the law provided that if you make a cash contribution or donation of less than 20,000,
you didn't need to even
disclose.
Don't
need to disclose who is paying and who is receiving.
Right.
Who are you receiving to? And you had instances here where a political party would break the legal or illegal, whatever donation they got, into 100 rupees or 200 rupees kind of receipts, so that you don't have to keep only thing you need to do is to just keep on generating receipts in the name of X, Y, or you don't even need not name. So what was the system? Now, can you sort of rectify? Can you come up with a system of bonds or any form of political donation where you have complete transparency and the trail, and you can bust or substitute the cash donation system?
Right.
Now, that was the challenge. Now, that challenge was not, and I agreed with the analysis of Finance Minister Arun Jaitley in that, and he actually related that how much problem he was a treasurer.
He was treasurer, yes.
Of the party as well, that how much of the cash problem which he faced as a treasurer as well, because they were also receiving about 90%, that's what he told, of the donation in the form of cash. And if you have to keep the cash and then you have to make payment, you make payment again by cash.
In cash, yes.
Right. So, you have a horrible state of affair. Now, if you can remedy this, even partly, by a system which does away with the need for the corporates to sort of convert their legitimate
money
income into cash to provide donation, that is a positive move forward.
Right.
So, these are the kind of innovations which were brought in through the electoral bonds, and it served that purpose. There was a complete KYC. The giver was also giving it from the legitimate account. It was not converting into cash. The political party was also receiving in the bank account, and then it was using that money to make payments by check or by now UPI, whatever you may call, right? So that is, I think that's a good advancement. It may not be a perfect and a complete advancement, but this is, I think, substantial advancement.
Right.
That's why you can't remove that basic feature of anonymity. If you remove that, again it becomes either the kind of donation which was already there in the Companies Act, or it will degenerate into a cash kind of thing, because the giver is not interested to be identified in our scheme of things who it is giving donation to.
And that is the problem that I think over the medium term needs to be addressed.
Exactly.
Because in the US they have no problems.
That's correct.
Right.
That is, as a society, if we can progress that, where the associational, that if a particular company has given donation to a particular political party, and then if it is raided or if it is acted upon by, that risk is not, the corporate is not interested.
Of course, I understand that. And now coming to the Finance Ministry and the RBI, you had spoken about in your book, you had mentioned how there was a period where Urjit Patel was the governor and Mr. Viral Acharya was the deputy governor, and you had commented about how both were distinguished economists, and this was a kind of a rare time where two very high senior positions were held by distinguished economists. But then you also went on and talked about how Urjit Patel's term as RBI governor was characterized by a lot of policy U-turns, and that Viral Acharya also created some controversy when he was talking about the government trying to take RBI reserves. Do you think the appointment of Shaktikanta Das now, who's not an economist and he is also a civil servant, is that an overcorrection, or is that something that is preferable in the RBI?
See, if you look at the history of RBI governors, before I think 2005-06 or so, or maybe middle of 90s, almost every governor was a civil servant.
Right.
So it's not a new thing. After the 1980s and early 1990s, when the world was they had concluded that the inflation problem is largely because of the unabated expansion of monetary supply.
Right.
Right. And therefore, and that monetary supply was largely on account of the pressures from the government. Because governments were running large fiscal deficits and printing money left and right. And the RBIs of the world used to provide ad hoc bills and many other things, right? And that was the principal reason for the inflation problem and consequential adverse impact on the growth of the
Correct.
And when Americans sort of solve this problem by sort of raising very high interest rates and bringing the inflation down, I think a view emerged at that time that the central bank needed independence from the government.
Of course.
Right.
Yes.
And for giving the independence, you need to have the professional economists and others away from the government to sort of to put a check of that kind on the government. That is how in our system also Raghavan and then Urjit Patel before Vimal Jalan and others professionals. Raghuram Rajan also. Right. So I think then a series of people got appointed from that. There was nothing wrong. I think they were professionals. They were also, they did help the government in a way or the nation in a way in controlling the inflation problem, a lot of reforms. Reddy also was part civil servant but also a very eminent economist.
Right.
And the nexus of those ad hoc bills and the buying of government bonds by the RBI and all, those sort of stopped and we had much better. There are other reasons why still we had episodes of inflation and all. That's it. So I think that is what it is. Now to come to your question about appointment, whether it's of Shaktikant Das, whether it's an overcorrection and all.
Not even him personally, but the fact that they appointed a civil servant rather than going for an economist again.
That is precisely the problem why the brilliant economists, Urjit Patel and Viral Acharya to that extent, was honestly my sense is either they got carried away by this notion of independence. Because ultimately monetary policy is also a policy to take the nation's inflation growth forward, managing the economy.
Yes.
It's not a completely separated.
Absolutely. It has to be in concert.
Correct.
Yes.
And the monetary policy as a matter of subject is allocated to Department of Economic Affairs.
Right.
And you created an institution. That is why you gave away the monetary policy, currency management to the Reserve Bank. So in a way, it's a part of the government.
Yes.
Though structured in a way where you exercise this more independently. But RBI also does a lot of other things. It's a regulator, it's also a debt manager of the government and all. So in India, the relationship between the Reserve Bank and the government is not of a pure central bank and the government, even that.
Right.
Now, when for reasons best known to them, there were numerous cases, payments law I have described here.
Right.
That non-performing loans and that 12th February circular, this very thing of not giving back the surplus to the government,
yes,
which legitimately, lawfully actually belongs to the government.
Right.
And this whole device of economic capital framework was an artifice designed to keep the money with the Reserve Bank, and Reserve Bank doesn't need that money. We can have a debate on that. Not a single paisa of that is required by the Reserve Bank.
Because they've maintained their adequacy buffers and everything are already being maintained.
No, we can discuss that, but the point here is that I'm citing certain reasons when you take so-called independent decisions. The fact that couple of decisions like this, and there are many more, how do you deal with the payment system, how do you deal with the non-performing loans, how do you deal with the surplus transfer, etc. And those decisions are taken in a unilateral manner,
right?
Not in consultation, and which in our view was not even justifiable, right? Then the brilliance of economist gets in a way converted into a confrontationalist, unnecessary, and that perhaps the government might have realized that the brilliance for the sake of brilliance, and which produces more disruptive effects rather than constructive effect, is not, and that is perhaps the reason why a civil servant is back.
Right. And so, sir, you mentioned the issue of reserves and the RBI and the finance ministry, that tussle. You also in your book mentioned one line that the Prime Minister had said, that the RBI was basically sitting on its wealth like a snake does. So could you tell us a little bit more about that, the PM's intervention?
This, after the Financial Express printed that extract, this has got undue attention. What Prime Minister was trying to say, in his own inimitable way, that because he had also by that time possibly developed a view that RBI is unreasonable in not transferring the surplus, right? And therefore he used this कि सांप की तरह से कुंडली मार के क्यों बैठे हो,
right, which is a normal Hindi expression.
Which is a normal Hindi expression, asking why are you unreasonably sitting over this.
Right.
So that is what it is, and I may not have perfectly translated that expression, but this is what it's conveyed, that don't sit over, this is not,
absolutely,
discuss, find a way which is a reasonable way, and that's it.
Now, sir, when you started in July 2017 at the Finance Ministry. That's exactly when GST was implemented.
Yes.
Now, the thing with GST though, do you feel that, or rather my question would be, what was the hurry to implement it right after the laws were passed? What was the thinking that maybe let's not wait for a year and work out the modalities and then implement it, let's do it right now?
See, Sharad, if you look at it, I think GST was very, very highly delayed introduction in the country.
I see.
When did we start about the idea of GST?
It was years ago.
If you go back even to VAT, which was introduced in 2003-04, the VAT laws were passed in 2003-04.
Right.
And I was in the finance ministry even at that time, and this was implemented in 4-5 virtually all over the country. So VAT had come. VAT is a stage prior to GST, right, where you get into the services and other things. 2010, if I remember correctly, the finance minister had made the announcement in the budget first time that we will have the GST by next year or something.
Yes.
So we were sort of moving very slowly.
Right.
And it was a complex, combative, contested kind of thing. I had also participated in the GST decision making in 2040 as Finance Secretary of Rajasthan in that coordination committee which was going on, and a lot of contentious issues. It was thanks to Arun Jaitley in 2014-15 that he could sort of get this consensus document and consensus law threshed out. I think there was no justification whatsoever to delay it even by a day.
Okay.
So it was perfectly done. We have another thing. I don't think we have ever configured anything perfectly at the start. Right. We always take some time.
Yes.
This was unusual in my judgment, that the GST law was passed by all the states before the GST was implemented. If I draw your attention to the VAT, so in 2004-5, almost all states passed, but 3 or 4 states
Had not.
of the BJP at that time
Yes.
had not passed the law, including Rajasthan,
Right.
my own cadre, which did it 1 year later. Because things don't look at the pension kind of NPS,
Yes.
where it took many years to get, and still not every state came on board.
Absolutely. And some
So-
have now moved back.
Yeah, some have now moved back. So we are in a federal polity where getting the perfect solution at the beginning is an impossible thing.
Right.
So I would not at all agree that this was a hurried kind of thing.
Okay.
Hurry was in a different context. That also partly is a legacy issue. When you move from a physical to a digital environment, and you just try to convert the physical into digital, that's a very imperfect way of doing things.
Right.
So the first time the GST was sort of implemented, the technology suppliers were given the task that you just convert
To just digitize it.
rather than digitizing and introducing a digital flow kind of things.
I see.
So those led to some issues rather than the conceptual or structural clarity of the law.
Right. And now, sir, my final question, and I'm sure that this is something a lot of people will ask you, so I thought I'd get there first. But do you feel that, given that you've had a lot of private conversations with very high ranking ministers, officials, a lot of which that you have talked about in your book and a lot of which that we've talked about right now, is it ethical, number one, for you to be recounting them? One. And two, do you expect any sort of blowback?
See, we are all public servants. Whether the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister or Secretary or a Joint Secretary or a Director. We are all public servants. And we deal with all the public policy matters.
Right?
Right. There is nothing private about it. There
Right.
is no private conversation. Right. These are all which I have recounted are the discussions which are taking place in meetings
Yes.
where policy issues are being discussed.
Right.
So I don't think there is any ethical issue
Okay.
at all, right? And I don't really understand the boundaries of ethics, etc. And what I understand is that these are public policy issues, public matters, which in my judgment, if you ask me from the ethical and policy perspective, must actually be made in a more open manner
Right.
rather than in the way secretively we make. Right. These one law which I drafted, helped in drafting the cryptocurrency law.
Yes.
The draft we put out in the public
Yes.
domain, it led to a lot of criticism. People sort of trolled me, right? I don't care, that's not a problem. But people should be allowed to participate in the decision making in
Right.
the consultative way. The way we design our laws and policies these days, ram it through the parliament and others, I think that's a bigger problem rather than the problem of. So by this, I think I am serving a public and national interest
Right.
by bringing the tussles and the struggles and the challenges which go into the public policy making. By no means I have taken a value judgment that I was right. Or somebody else was wrong. That's not my. Of course, I have a right to feel that what I am propagating or what I am trying to get at is a better solution. But if that is, I'm not the final deciding authority in many. So if that decision is not taken, I've recounted quite a few
Right.
where I was ruled and we implemented. So that's fine. But I think, in fact, it's my wish if this book can serve as a kind of, I would like more people to actually bring out the real things which go behind the policy making and discussion.
Absolutely.
So I absolutely know.
Right.
Now I have no sort of comment on blowback part of
Right.
it. Right. I don't expect, because I think I did this when I was in service. Most of these things took place in service.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
So the same attitude, things continue. I don't think there is any environment in the country where people should be sort of punished or proceeded against only because they express an honest opinion. In fact,
Absolutely.
to my mind, in some of the cases, the defense I have provided in the book, for example, on the electoral bonds, or if you go through that chapter on airport monetization and others,
the 6 airports.
the kind of defense which is provided, I think it serves to explain a lot of cobwebs and misgivings about
And the
those
thinking that the
decisions.
government had. Absolutely, no. It's an absolutely fascinating read, sir. I had a great time reading it, and I think all of you will as well. But on that note, that concludes our discussion. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very
for joining
much.
me.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Right.